So I want to share some real results of some of the leaders here in China. We've been accused of overestimating what the market is in China for IVD. I'm guilty of that. I also understand because I was a worldwide market development manager for Corning many, many years ago. And when we had our meetings, the last thing we wanted to do, if we had just gotten our bonus for growing sales in China 20%, we didn't want somebody coming in and saying the market had been growing at 30%. So I understand that it isn't always good news to hear that, but I tell it like it is, and this is what we believe it is. So I won't spend a lot of time on who we are. You've read something about who we are. What I really wanted to concentrate on is that in addition to the market research that we do, and the regulatory that my wife's company does from the same office, we've also been a servicing importer for 10 years. So we've actually walked the walk here in China. We know how sales that had to be sold in the past. But I really wanted to say that we're citizens and residents of China, and that makes us healthcare consumers as well as researchers. So we're out there, and I'm polling all the time. And look, first of all, let me introduce a couple of our people. Simona Lee has been doing the research for us for over 6 years now. And Ren Jie is our molecular specialist. And she'd be available, they'll both be available to you if you want to chat with them during the course of the next few days. So we're healthcare consumers, and I'm somewhat, probably as many of you are, somewhat of a China news junkie. And I think that's because Yahoo has me pegged as liking China news, so they keep giving me more China news, whether I'm in the US or I'm here in China. And so what I wanted to do is share with you also some of the very recent news on issues, and then try to relate how those issues affect IVD. There's the back.
You go back.
There's the forward. So anyway, these are some of the objectives, and I won't read them to you, but I don't pretend to have all the answers. So what I wanted to do is just share my opinions, and then maybe that'll be food for thought, and over the next couple of days, and during the panel discussion, we can talk more about some of the details. And I don't expect all agreement on these issues. Many of them are very complex issues. But here's, if we look at the China market since 2004, there were some events that I think significantly influenced the market. And one of those was the anti-corruption effort that took place back in 2005 with an arrest and some unfortunate things that happened to Mr. Zhong. And there was, at that time, there was a lot of news about procurement in the medical industry in China. And it really put a chill on the market here for about a year. But then a year later, the dark cloud blew over and everything went back to normal. And so that some of the pent-up demand then started taking off. We survived the financial crisis, which I'll talk about as one of the issues. And the biggest thing was healthcare reform. And healthcare reform pumped, depending on what the exchange rate was, $525 billion US into the healthcare system in China. I used to give talks, well, first of all, let me say that regarding healthcare reform, probably because we had done some projects with the Gates Foundation where we had traveled on the countryside. Back in 1983, 1984, I traveled the steam trains out to the countryside because we had done technology transfer here. We transferred blood gas technology to a company in Shanghai and automated chemistry to a company of Shanghai Southern University. And so I had a special interest in healthcare reform. I want to say now, when we go out to the countryside and win on that project, quite frankly, I didn't see a whole lot of difference between 2007 and 1983 when I went out to look at healthcare in the countryside. And that, for me, was what stimulated my interest in healthcare reform. I happened to be invited to the conference at Tsinghua University, which is one of the think tanks, to make recommendations to the National Development and Health. And so what happened is, as a result of that, our interest was to follow this very closely, and we have been, and it really has been happening. It's not just propaganda, it's not just, oh, we're going to do all these things and it never happens. It's really been happening. And it's really been driving healthcare. And the 5-year plans after that, 5-11 plan, also focused on healthcare. And you'll see later that the focus continues to be on healthcare, which is beneficial to IVD. And we're back in an anti-corruption campaign, and surprisingly, it hasn't seemed to have the same effect it did in 2005. Some of that, I think, is because it's absolutely sustained. It's continuing, and while we see a little bit of a slowdown, I don't think it's going to do what it did back in 2005. I won't dwell on this, but these are the companies that I'd just like to share with you some information we have on them. And I chose them because they're a mix of what country they come from, what kinds of product lines they have, and whether they're focused on reagents or focused on instruments. You all know, I'm sure by now, that the IVD business is not about instruments, it's about reagents. That's where all the profits come from, that's where the continuing revenue comes from, and the instruments are just a vehicle to be able to provide those reagents. So these are some of the companies we'll look at. Roche is the leader. Surprised to no one, I think. But what may be a surprise is that in 2014, they passed $1 billion US sales in China. And how did they do that? Well, this is, according to our data, this is where they were, and this is how they got there. Abbott, $718 billion US. You start adding some of these up now, too, and they get up to a pretty high number pretty quickly. And Sysmex, both of those other two have pretty broad ranges, but Sysmex has been somewhat limited in their range, and the products that they sell are not as big reagent consumption products as Abbott and Roche sell. So, but even yet, they're 445 million now. And I see some shaking of heads out here, people who I'm sure are looking at their own numbers and saying, "Oh, where do I fit in there?" Okay, but and the other thing about Sysmex that I just want to mention is that, and it's true of the European as well. One of the benefits to U.S. companies has been that the yuan has been tied somewhat to the U.S. dollar. So when you report the results in the U.S., you can forecast them pretty well and you can report them pretty well. Poor Japanese companies and some of the European companies, whoa, and this is what happened to the Japanese yen. And so last year in Japanese yen, Sysmex was lucky because they had a 48% rise in sales based on the yen. A couple of years before that, it was down there, it was just the opposite. And this is just some of the Sysmex sales history. It was a 48%. And then we get into some of the Chinese companies, and the leader of Chinese companies for IVD is Mindray. They're actually, some of you may know Lou Reisberg from BioBridge Strategies. Lou and I went down in 2010, went down to Mindray, and we spent 3 full days with their staff, their IVD managers down there, and we tried to help them with how to develop a strategy for IVD. And the reason being because the founders of Mindray did it on imaging and did it on patient monitoring, all hardware with not a lot of consumables. And they, I think, at that time still didn't understand that it was all about consumables. So they at least have been trying to track that now. They introduced an immunoassay, an autoimmune immunoassay analyzer, and in fact, they've been concentrating on developing and spending a good deal of money and time on developing instruments that were high throughput instruments for the upper levels. The problem with that is it's really difficult to compete with the foreigners up there, and they haven't been able, I think, to adequately figure that out. They also, while China was growing at what I'll show you is about 30%, or had been, they were focused on the international market. So they were spending their efforts and money mostly on trying to get broader, and now their business is more than half outside China for the other products. But they've really lost some market share. And this is how they got there. Diane Jean, I think Diane Jean might be here today. I think there's a couple of things that helped Diane Jean. One is they get into the immunoassay business. Well, first of all, Diane Jean was the distributor of ABI and Roche PCR equipment for many years. Back a few years ago, I was told that they had 70% of the placements of PCR here in China, and they were able to develop their own reagents to go with those instruments. So they had quite a reagent base of molecular, and they added to that with some immunoassay products. And the other thing that happened was that the blood supply not only accepted molecular for testing, but they also demanded it, and it's phased in different places. But I think that had a big effect on Diane Jean too. And there are many companies now that are around 100 million, Chinese companies. And those that I just showed you were just, that didn't include their testing. Maybe I'll mention too with Diane Jean that they have a business, it's a pretty synergistic business because they have a reference laboratory where they do a lot of esoteric tests and molecular tests. And they develop clients who send their samples to them to be analyzed. When those clients' volume gets high enough, they are also the seller of the kits and the instruments, so they can then work with those same customers saying, well, it's time now where you got your own instrument and reagents from us. So they have a pretty synergistic business. And they're at around 100 million too. These are, I think my slides may have been an older version because this was supposed to come up earlier. But these are the leaders: Roche, Danaher, Abbott, Siemens, Sysmex, Hitachi, up in the category of foreign, and most of the market still is with foreign companies. Another one worth mentioning is BioMarow, who I think is here too. Because they grew 30% last year, 27% the year before, 40% the year before, and so they're growing and they're coming. And then these are some of the leading Chinese companies, and I just quickly looked at some of the numbers we have to put these up here. But we also tracked 437 other, and so you can see that the China IVD market is very, very fragmented at the mid and low level. There are so many companies who have a little bit of that market. Well, we think the market size is $6 billion US here now. And we think it's been growing by, at times, 30% per year. And now it's slowing a little bit, maybe to 20 to 25%, probably closer to 20%. But it's still the fastest growing market in the world. And when we try to do this market sizing, there are some factors that we have to realize, and that is that many of the numbers, for example, the Roche numbers may include some Hitachi numbers. So if we add Hitachi numbers to the Roche numbers, we get a bigger number. So there are many IVD manufacturers that they're also multinational distributors, and some of the distributors of Chinese products for each other, and we don't want to double account for that either. And then the other thing is that many of the Chinese companies now, they're not having, I would say, any not very good success in the developed markets. In Western Europe and in the US, it's still very difficult to break in. But in the other developing markets, they are really making their presence known there. So if we're looking at the IVD market in China, we have to also know what the foreign sales were. So when we walk around and we ask you questions like, how many employees do you have? What percent of exports do you do? This is all things that go into our database. And the other thing is that the market clearly has been segmented in Class 3 hospitals and then in the mid-level and the lower-level hospitals. So to come over here once a quarter and go and interview some Class 3 hospital laboratories and come up with the numbers is not really good. And I know some, they do it with long-distance telephone conversations to get at this. You can't get at this without living in it. So now let's talk about some of the issues. And some we can talk about, some we can't. By the way, I had a little trouble getting in this morning because I couldn't find my way here. And if I search, and one of the issues, some of these issues might be a little touchy. One is internet censorship. And I don't know why the organizers decided to have this on June 4th. Because June 4th, you can't find out anything that's going on the internet. So for me to search and try to find my way here is a little difficult. Some of these issues are really serious threats which we really can't deal with. But I really truly believe, I can't say enough good things too about President Xi. I think he's just doing a tremendous job and a very difficult job, which we'll see. But through it all, I expect that the demand for IVD is just going to continue. So if we look at the headlines in the U.S., it's all about the sky is falling, that you know, China's going to fall apart, and this was something, at least it was reasonable news, it appeared in Bloomberg. And it just talked to, in the beginning paragraph, it talked about the bubble, property bubble, and the construction is going in reverse, and there's bad debts everywhere, and we'll talk about some of these. And oh yeah, the air is still dirty. And so I want to pull some of these up and say, well, let's see what's really going on there, and what effect is it going to have on us. So this is just some of the things, and it's what I find encouraging too is that the Chinese press is airing some of these issues too. So at least that's a good step in trying to solve some of them, is airing them first and then trying to solve them. So we have not only the high risks, that the whole bottom could fall out of the economy and the IVD market, and that's possible. But we want to look at the potential that some of these could positively influence the IVD market. And I come from a foreign perspective, so I'm really sort of gearing it toward the foreign companies who also happen to be my clients. But some of this you'll see also is good for Chinese companies as well. And as I say, these are nuanced. You know, you can say, well, it might be bad, but it might be good, but it might be ugly. But it was to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And these were the top 20 issues that I wanted to talk about. Put them in the good box, the bad box, or the ugly box. And this is how the first one is the economy. And this is how, if we measure economy and GDP, this is what happened in China. GDP has now become the second largest economy in the world. However, there are lots of different ways to measure GDP and assumptions that go into GDP. So when we say that GDP is crashing, it's from 14% at one time to 7%. We have to understand what it is that's in that GDP. And this is the, I think, International Monetary Fund, who's predicting that 2015, 2016, the economy in China is going to slow down, but it's certainly not going to, it's still going to be moving faster than any of the developed economies. We don't need that one. That was just the drop from 14% to 7%. You know, but when you compare that, the forecast now for the U.S. are 3.2% growth. And that's the fastest growth in 10 years. And then we complain about China's going to be 7%. Boy, when you put it in that perspective, it says this is still the place to be. And also, I have heard numbers like 70% or 80% of GDP is infrastructure, and it's building and the trades that go along with building. It's not consumer. It's not the consumption part of it. And so if it's even only 50% infrastructure, it says the 7% from the 14%. That's not going to come out of IVD. That's going to come out of some other parts of the economy. So what I wanted to look at here is from 2000. We'll look at some things about what happened between the crash of 2007. Just assuming that the world economy is going to crash again, which some people are saying, yes, that's going to happen again. And in 2007 it crashed, and the U.S. Actually went into recession. They had negative growth, but they pumped some money into it, and you'll see where that came from, and it rebounded to 2.7%. Look at what happened with China during that same time. China was up at, well, about 14%, I guess, and it dropped down to 7 or 8%, and then recovered to 12%. You know, you compare that with what was going on in the U.S., and China bailed out the world. If it weren't for China pumping money into the economy, I think the world economy would have gone down. So what was happening while all this was going on? What was happening to IVD? I think I showed you before. Nothing. It was still growing. So, you know, we've been there. We've been through that. And IVD is still survives. And this was the alarming part of debt, and that was that the debt since 2007 has grown. This is debt as compared to, as a percentage of GDP. And it certainly has grown, and it's now up there with a lot of the developing countries. But if you really examine where that came from, since 2007, what happened in 2007 in the U.S. is that people realized, everybody realized that consumers were accumulating too much debt, and that corporations also were accumulating debt. So here's how it broke down. In the U.S., overall it was about a 12–13% increase. This is from 2007 to 2014 during that recovery. But all the increase that came from government, and consumers reduced their debt, and corporations reduced their debt, and many corporations were banking cash like crazy. If you look at China, their debt increased by 80%, but most of that debt is corporate debt. And so when I look at the impact that's likely to have, maybe for foreign companies, maybe that's not a bad thing, because some of these Chinese companies have been doubling and tripling sales per year. But you don't do that without getting some money to expand. And so many of the corporations in China are pretty stretched as far as debt goes right now. And if they want to refinance that debt, or they need to go for new debt, they may run into some problems, because that debt has to be reduced. When you look, President Xi has said some things also about state-owned enterprises and what he wants to privatize, including 7,500 hospitals in the next decade. Public hospitals he wants to prioritize, and he wants to privatize. And the reason for that, well, when you look at the debt, those big old state-owned companies that are not making money, there's about 30% of them that have not been making any profit. They've been negative. And so I think he's realized that, and he knows something has to be done about that. When you compare that to the privately owned, then it's only, what, 12, 13%, something like that. And for those, there are many startup companies who don't expect to make a profit, that they're still investing in the future. Cepheid's here too, I think, and Cepheid's one that's been investing in the future for a long time, and I don't think still has turned a profit. But that's also true of some Chinese companies as well. What he's done is he's allowed for the first time for Chinese companies to go bankrupt. And this is just a couple of examples, and including a big real estate developer. So let's look at price. I think I have the wrong, unfortunately, not time to do it now, but I had a couple of different presentations in here, and I think this is not the one I intended to do, but we'll keep going. Pricing reforms. I think the jury's still out on pricing. Everybody was concerned. They say, well, these pricing reforms are going to affect IVD pricing. And they have to some extent. And there's been some experiments going on how to change the patient pricing in China. But I still think that, first of all, there was a mandate that said in 2013, everybody had to do this. Well, we go out there and look, and nobody's doing it still. They're still going by the old IVD pricing. And so I think there's a lot that's still going to be worked out here. And this was just an example of one where they tried to change some prices, and in fact they got an uproar from people who said, wait a minute, my ongoing costs are going to be too high. So they just backed off that and said, well, let's go back to the other one. We'll rethink that. Because what they have to do is for the hospitals have to be able to survive. So they have to be able to make a profit. If you take the profits that they've been making in drugs and MRI and CT, where every time you go have a headache and you go in there, you get one of those, if you're going to cut back on that, then you have to increase something else in order to make it neutral for not only for the hospital, but neutral for the patient as well. So there's a lot of issues still around pricing that are going to affect that. I won't spend any time on this. This is the effort on corruption, and I did have some other slides. I'm sorry, we opened the wrong one here. But this was just some things that were going on, and there was some really recent news, two pieces of recent news. One is I think the director of the guy who's responsible for clinical trials is under arrest. And the deputy leader of, help me, someone. Oh, that's right, of FDA, yeah, is now under investigation. So it's continuing, and it's going to impact our business. Yeah, I'm sorry, these slides are sort of mixed up, but I had, what I was doing was putting things into boxes, and the box that this was involved in was innovation, and the fact that the Chinese government now is putting a lot of money into innovation, and brain drain meaning that you see 92% of the students from China who got their PhD in the United States were still there 5 years later. And that was good for the United States because we got some of your best talent. But now what's happened is there's a reverse happening where there are some incentives to bring some of the overseas Chinese back to China. And it's working. And we work with a company. We found a Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics. We did a study to look at some innovative new tests that might apply to the poor in the countryside. So very user-friendly and very cheap. And we found a company and recommended to them. And that's an overseas Chinese who worked for BD for 8 years, then worked on a startup with biochips, and then returned to China. And I've been on their design review board on this new product that now Gates has invested in, and Lenovo also has invested in directly. So they've got plenty of money now to move ahead, and they have a clever, really clever product that's going to be a point-of-care molecular product. But that's the brain drain that's returning. Oh, this, I probably wanted to hide this, but because I know there are people from BGI here. But this was something that was in the newspaper as well online. And it was just saying that, and the point here was that innovation, money is not what's going to fix innovation. It's creativity that's going to fix innovation. And this was just a statement from somebody who said that you can be clever here, but you can be more clever in the U.S. And it's a mindset that is changing, I think, slowly, but needs to change more. I only have 5 minutes here, and 5 minutes left, I'm sorry. And we had cut this presentation down considerably, but these currency stability, I think I mentioned before. And BioMarot, for one, was also reporting, well, this is based on currency effects. This was just a variation in some of the currencies, and how it's difficult to keep up with this. I'm going to just move ahead here. Well, I guess the bottom line of all of this is this the beginning of the end? And I don't think so. There's no more room in the pool, that's for sure. And there's not a whole lot of room left on the highway. That's probably me on the motor scooter down there on the right. But for IVD, I think the bull is going to keep running. And this is, I'm not an investor, so I don't know who this legendary Jim Rogers is, but this was something that he said online or in the news. And that is that, and this was comparing China to the U.S. Back a generation ago. He said, we rose to power and glory in the 19th century despite a horrible civil war, 15 depressions, very few human rights, little rule of law, and yet we became a pretty successful country in the 20th century. So he says, that's my view of China. He thinks that's where China's going to go, and I think that's where China's going to go too. So we all need to be here participating in that. And this was the final paragraph of that Bloomberg report. He just believes that it's going to continue, and his words were, "We're stuck with trying to help them get out of this, because if the economy in China stumbles now, the world economy is going to stumble even more. So it's time to hang up our boxing gloves and try to work together to get this resolved." So just in summary, the risks, I think many of the risks are real. I think the present management is going to manage these risks, and we're going to get through it. But certainly healthcare spending will continue. Third world healthcare will no longer be tolerated in the countryside or for the poor in the cities. Serious health issues and drug overprescription, we know that happens. That'll be addressed, and my feeling is that that's going to require more diagnostic testing, not less diagnostic and IVD testing. And then all these other things, lifestyle changes. I mentioned to somebody at a booth out here. We did a project for a diabetes test many years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. And as I was talking to them, I asked them, how do you decide what developing country you're going to go into to invest in for the future? And he wasn't joking. He said, we follow McDonald's. And now there's over 2,500 McDonald's outlets, and there's 3,500, 2,000 McDonald's and 3,500 KFC, and you see the diabetes rate beginning to skyrocket. So those kinds of things I think are going to continue. And nucleic acid and gene sequencing is going to blossom for sure. And I really believe that if you can combine those into a point-of-care offering, that's really going to be where it's at. And the opportunity now is really, and we do a lot of this for the foreign companies, evaluating some companies, Chinese companies here to partner with. And many of these local companies are also getting lots of finances from the government, and they don't have to give that up if they get bought by a foreign company. They just have to continue with the project. Many of these companies have been receiving huge amounts of money for R&D. And some of these IVD companies, Chinese IVD companies, are going to be encouraged to invest or acquire overseas. And these social safety nets are going to continue to improve health insurance breadth. It's going to get wider, more coverage, and it's going to get deeper, and that's just going to bring more people to the hospital to be tested. And same with the infrastructure, especially in the lower level facilities. I'm convinced that's going to continue. And eventually what's happening, a lot of the hardware that's been put in has been in these mid and lower levels, but the public, and I think you can probably back this up for me, don't trust the quality of care in those facilities. So they still will wait in line for 2.5 days like Simona did when she was getting her pregnancy test. They'll wait in line in the class 3 hospital before they'll go there. But that's going to change too. And there's going to be more and more, especially the community health centers in the city, there's going to be more and more testing that gets done there. And that's not going to necessarily take away from the class 3 hospitals, because all these other things are going to continue to be expanding the patients that need testing in the class 3 hospitals. So anyway, that's, thank you. That's, I hope, food for thought. And we can do more with it in the panel discussion. But chew on that for now. Thank you.